Welcome everybody to this rock review. Now for the rock test, we're going to go through pretty much everything you need to know. And as long as you've been in class, you put a little time and effort into studying the notes. If you've done a really good job in Schoology and you've been paying attention in class, you should be set for the test. So let's take a look at what we need to do for the test. First of all, we've done the rock lab. So can you identify the rocks? Now, one of the neat things that you've been able to do is you've been able to look at the rocks, study the rocks, analyze the rocks, and you've been able to create your own key for this test. And this key is crucial because it'll help you identify the rocks. So let's take a look at these rocks right here. So you got 5 rocks. Now, do you know which ones are which? First of all, do you know if these are metamorphic, igneous, or sedimentary? So why don't you pause the video and study them for a little bit. Otherwise, and see if you can identify them. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what they are and what I looked for when I was putting these on here. First of all, this one right here. This one right here is quartzite. And actually, pink quartzite like you find here in the Baraboo area. This one right here, can you guys identify this one? Okay, this one is schist. And one of the ways I find or figure out if it's schist, it looks like it's got some mica in it. And it almost reminds me, it looks like it's been melted, but yet we know it's not melted, because if it was melted completely, it would be an igneous rock. So it kind of looked like it was starting to melt, it was starting to heat up, and we know metamorphic rocks are subjected to heat and pressure. So this one right here is schist. Now this one right here, hard to pronounce, hard to spell sometimes, it's gneiss, G-N-E-I-S-S. And one of the ways you can tell the difference between these two right here is simple. When I look at them, and when I look in here, you should see banding going on. You should see lines coming across. This is the telltale sign that it is indeed gneiss. Now this one right here is marble. And a lot of statues are made of marble. Some buildings are made out of marble. Maybe you have figurines or something else made out of marble. And this one right here is, do you remember the other metamorphic rock? If you said slate, you're right. And I put this picture in here because if you look at it carefully, especially down here, it looks like it's got a lot of thin layers. You can see one here, you can see one here, and it looks like there's a couple more in here. Slate tends to be really thin because it was subjected to heat and pressure. So these are the metamorphic rocks. How did you do? Were you able to identify them? Okay, let's go to the next set of rocks. So when we look at these rocks, first of all, do you know what kind of rocks these are, or what type? Is it metamorphic, sedimentary, or igneous? Well, you know it's not metamorphic. We just did those. If you said sedimentary, you're right. So first of all, this one, most of you guys get this one. It's got strata, so it's got its layers. It looks like sand. It's sandstone. Okay, this one right here, sometimes people get confused with marble because sometimes they look similar, but this is your limestone. Sometimes these actually have fossils of fish or something in them. So, you know, watch for that, or they might have some other shells in there. So if you look around, that would be a telltale sign that it's going to be limestone, because it's the only one typically out of these 4 that will have that. This one right here, I think you guys can figure out pretty quickly. It's hard to see sometimes in these videos, but here's a little pebble. Here's a little pebble. So there's these smaller rocks within the big rock. So if you said conglomerate, you're exactly right. Now this one a lot of times get confused with slate, but it's not slate. What do you think it is? If you said shale, you're right. Now a lot of times shale will, you know, if you get it wet, it will smell like clay, but I'm not going to let you get it wet on a test, because if you get it wet, you know, everybody's going to know what it is. And a lot of times clay will get compacted together, you know, be subjected to heat and pressure, and it will create your slate. So it's still dark, it looks a lot like slate, but you're not going to find those thin layers that you did in the other rock. Slate. So here are our igneous rocks. Now if you're looking at these igneous rocks and you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, Mr. Attune, there's 5 rocks here. We only had to know 4. Well, that's because 2 of them are the same, and we'll see if you can figure out which 2 they are. So if you want to pause the video again, try and identify them on your own, do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to get right into naming them. First of all, you know what this is. Sometimes it's called volcanic glass. This is your obsidian. Sometimes it's neat if you have some really thin layers and it's not too thick, you can actually see through it. This one right here is filled with holes. It's really light. This is your pumice. Here you have your granite, and granite's usually pretty easy to pick out. You can easily, it's going to be intrusive. You're going to easily see the large crystals in it. Now, if you might be saying, okay, well, those are the three, these must be the same, and they are. And I wanted to show you both pieces of basalt, because a lot of times basalt, you're not going to be able to see the crystals with the naked eye. You're going to have a magnifying glass or something because they're pretty small. Now, this is also a piece of basalt, but it had a lot of gases when it was created in it, and that's why you have all these pores in it. So be careful. I might show you either one on a test, and you should be able to catch and figure out that it's not these. So it's a darker color rock. Don't mistake it with slate. Don't mistake it with shale. But I think you'll do all right in a test. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, let me flip to the next slide. You're going to have to do something like this, and we practice this in class. Here it says list at least 2 important facts. Don't forget to do this. 2 important facts about each rock type in the appropriate space. In the center of the Venn diagram, list 1 important fact that all 3 top rock types have in common. So we practice this in class. First of all, sedimentary rocks. I don't think I'm going to write everything down because it's hard to write in that small of a space with such a large pen. But what do you know about sedimentary rocks? First of all, they can form layers called strata. Okay, what else do we know about sedimentary rocks? Well, compaction, cementation. So sediments, they're made from sediments, and sediments settle in layers, and that's your strata. And then they're compacted together, and you've got natural glues that glue them together. You can have fossils in them. All good things to tell me about sedimentary rocks. Now, if you want full credit for igneous rocks, I need to see molten in here somewhere. And the reason for that, in order to get igneous rocks, the rock must have been melted at some point in time. It must have been molten. Other things you can tell me about igneous rocks, you can talk about how they're classified as intrusive or extrusive. Maybe you'll tell me that intrusive rocks tend to have large crystals. Extrusive rocks tend to have small crystals. Maybe you'll tell me you can also separate it by whether it's basaltic or granitic. So those are some of the things you can tell me about igneous rocks. Now the last one's down here at the bottom. It's a little bit harder to see, and that's metamorphic rocks. What can you tell me about metamorphic rocks? If you want full credit, you have to make sure you mention the terms heat and pressure. Those are the 2 that I'm really looking for. Now be careful. Make sure you let me know that it's heat. It's not enough to melt it. So it's not molten, but it does heat it up. And that's why schist kind of looks like it does. It looks like it's been melted. Well, it does look like it's been subjected to heat because it was subjected to heat. So heat and pressure. You can also tell me about how metamorphic rocks can be foliated, how they often get formed deep inside the earth. Which, if we go back to sedimentary rocks, if you remember the notes, these typically form at the surface of the earth. And this is why we tend to see more sedimentary rock than any other type of rock, because they form at the surface, where in order to be subject to heat and pressure, you have to be pretty deep inside the earth. And molten rock, you know, obviously they form at the surface as well as inside the surface. Now, what can you tell me about all of them? Well, you can mention some things like the rock cycle, and maybe you can talk about how they all can create other rocks through the rock cycle. Maybe you'll tell me that they're all created or formed from minerals. So I'm just looking for something to tie them all together, and those are usually the top 2 answers that I'll get, and those are fine answers to give me. So make sure you can do this on the test. Now, the other big thing you're going to have to do on a test is you're going to have to know the rock cycle. So what I'd like you to do is pause this video again, and what I'd like you to do is see if you can answer these. Okay, so you've paused the video. How did you do? So let's work through these together. First of all, if you're going to go from magma to igneous rock, what does magma have to do before it can become a cool down rock? Well, it has to cool off. So that should be pretty easy for you guys to figure out. Now, in order to become metamorphic rock, what are the 2 buzzwords? Do you remember that we just talked about? Or to become metamorphic, it's subjected to heat and pressure. So if you know that heat and pressure creates metamorphic rocks, look at the two arrows that point towards metamorphic rock. They're both going to be heat and pressure. Now, in order to get sediments, how do you get sediments? We mentioned this in class. They have to be weathered down. And so weathering and erosion, weathering is the breaking down of rocks, erosion is the movement. So I'm just looking at the arrows. And once I figure out, and here's a secret for you, it's not really a secret, you guys will probably figure this out. If you can figure out one arrow, all the other arrows are the same. They point towards sediments. So now if you have sediments, how do you go from that to sedimentary rocks? Well, compaction and cementation. Now we have some meltings left. I probably should have put these in over here, because how do you get magma? You have to melt the rock. So you've done something like this on Schoology. Make sure you review Schoology. In fact, if we take a look at the next slide, here's your answers. So just in case you didn't see me work through it. But hear this, study Schoology. All those questions that you've seen on Schoology are going to be on the test. I'm not gonna, try and trick you with the test. The tests are pretty straightforward. So what I would suggest you do to study is get back onto Schoology. Look over. I'll make sure Schoology is open through the test, but look it over and study the ones that you got wrong. You can always retake Schoology. Maybe your goal should be to get a perfect score on it. That way you'll know you'll be ready for the test. So again, study Schoology, study your notes, maybe watch this review video, and obviously if you're watching it, I'm telling you to watch it, so it doesn't make any sense for me to tell you to watch it because you're already watching it. And make sure you study the rocks and the rock cycle. So if you have any questions, and if you watch this video before the test, come and ask me. Come in the morning of the test. I will answer any questions that you have other than, what are the answers to number 1, number 2, number 3, and because I'm not going to give you the answers. So take care, goodbye, and I hope this video helped.